Hello, this is Ever, one half of New Entry Wrestling Podcast with my co-host Ian. Today I'm doing a special episode. We're gonna do my top 10 most hardcore matches of all time. Like I said, this is Ever, one half of New Entry Wrestling Podcast. Thank you for joining me. The great thing about pro wrestling is that there are so many varieties from technical, cruiserweight, lucha libre, strong style, and so much more. But there's one, the one we're focused on today is hardcore wrestling. Hardcore wrestling has always been a topic of discussion with blood being spilled to crazy stunts off high spots, fire, thumbtacks, glass, barbed wire, and any other weapon that people can get their hands on. People know of wrestling promotions that excelled in hardcore wrestling like FMW, BJW, Big Japan Wrestling, Combat Zone Wrestling, WXW, XPW, ECW, GCW, and so much more. Hardcore wrestling is not for the faint of heart. It has had trouble. I had some trouble watching matches because they're so gruesome. And if you plan to watch them, don't eat a big lunch. Today, we're talking about the top 10 most hardcore matches of all time. You know, my top 10. Let's go. At number 10, I have Ian Rotten versus Axel Rotten in a Taipei death match, which took place on July 1st, 1995 at ECW Hardcore Heaven at the ECW Arena in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Ian and Axel are brothers, and after having a fallout, they decided to settle the score in a Taipei death match. A Taipei death match is when two men wrap their hands in tape, dip their hands in glue, and cover their glue covered hands in broken glass and go down on each other. Pretty much just wrap your hands, put it in, wrap it up, and then just punch each other. Um, Axel punched Ian and immediately opened him up. It was crazy. One punch opened him up immediately. Luckily, it didn't strike him in the eye. Bell and Fazio stopped the match. After Ian Rotten couldn't stop bleeding anymore, and one of the craziest matches in ECW history. ECW really tried to push the envelope and did not disappoint. Number 9, I have Yuko Ya- Miyamoto versus Abdullah Kobayashi in a 445 light tube death match, which took place in 2009 in Big Japan Pro Wrestling. If one light tube in a wrestling match seems like a lot, imagine 445 light tubes. Miyamoto and Kobayashi were known to be ruthless and they truly showed that in this match. They did not hold back. It's actually hard to go through this match and showing no mercy for each other. Made you turn your head away the screen sometimes, you know. Check it out in your own discretion. But that was my number 9. Number 8, I have Thumbtack Jack versus JC Bailey in a barefoot thumbtacks death match. A lot to swallow there. Which took place in 2010 in Combat Zone Wrestling, or CCW. I can imagine putting being barefoot and thumbtacks in the same sentence, but they did. Combat Zone Wrestling was known for crazy matches, but this one took the cake. Both men had a reputation of being ruthless in the ring, and they definitely showcased it here. Thumbtacks being placed in the ring, both men getting pierced from head to toe. Thumbtack Jack would do something so crazy I had to turn away. He took out needles and he stuck them in the bare feet of JC Bailey. Just stuck them like I think multiple times. A needle was placed on JC Bailey's neck and got into the thumbtacks. Truly hardcore for sure. And obviously Thumbtack Jack took the win there. Number 7, I have Sabu and the Sheik versus uh, of Satoshi Onada and Tarzan Goto in a Hellfire death match in 1992 in the Japanese promotion FMW, Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, which made a comeback recently. When you hear Sabu, the Sheik, Satoshi Onada, and Tarzan Goto in a match, you know it's going to be extreme and bloody. The match had the ring surrounded by fire, causing temperatures to rise, but the winds did not help. The winds actually caused a fire to spread to a kerosene soaked cloth, burning the barbed wire around the ring. The men would fight but could not withstand the heat. It went. I think they say it went up to like 1,000 degrees or higher. Sabu, Onada, and Goto all left the match with minor burns. The 65-year-old, the Sheik, ended up going to the hospital with smoke inhalation and third-degree burns. It's truly one of the most hardcore matches of all time. I advise you, at your own discretion, watch the match. But the ring being on fire, the visual was amazing. I'm like, no way. People say wrestling's fake. Like, really? You see that fire? It's burning. Um, at number six, I have Zandig versus Nick Mondo in a best 2 out of 3 light tube match, which took place on July 23rd, 2003, at Combat Zone Ultra Violent Tournament of Death 2. Zandig and Nick Mondo were crazy and always took risks. After the men went back and forth hitting each other with weapons and light tubes, eventually both men went on the roof and and a set of tables set on the bottom to break their fall. Zandig had Mondo on his shoulders. They slammed right through the table below. They did not land right. Actually, Mondo ended up injuring his back by hitting the concrete. He hit the concrete straight flat. Mondo would win the match, but then he went to beat Ian Rotten and win the tournament. Ian Mondo would actually end up retiring because of this match at the age of 23. You definitely see if you ever see the highlight at your own discretion, you just see him like grab him and you see him boom slam. So yeah, always be careful out there. Before I continue, check out our merch store at teespring.com and Pro Wrestling Tees. Also check us out on TikTok and Instagram at New Entry Wrestling Pod. Also, check us out on Twitter at New Entry Wrestling Podcast. Make sure to check us out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, and YouTube. Like, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. We got cool highlights on there. We're adding more shorts, adding like things like this. And let's continue. At number five, I have Thumbtack Jack versus Drake Younger in a Saw Death match, which took place in 2007 in the German wrestling promotion WXW West Side Extreme Wrestling. The match was inspired by the Saw movies, name of the match, and took place in the West Side Dojo that looked like an abandoned warehouse. Thumbtack Jack would use a chair with razor blades, each of them going through them. The matchup the match up the ante, introducing needles into the match, like the scene in Saw 2. They took turns throwing each other into the needles and also stabbing each other with the needles, truly turning the stomach. They don't like that. That's why I'm like, this is kind of brutal. The men both stuck needles over each other, but the both men could not continue the match. It ended in a no contest. But it was that brutal. I mean, we had a match before, like I mentioned, with JC Bailey and Thumbtack Jack with the needles going to the feet, but this is way more brutal. Um, so yeah, if you're gonna watch this match, just be wary. You're gonna see a lot of needles. If you're not a needle person, it's not for you. Trust me. I almost threw up. Number four, I have Kenji Fukimoto versus Mahashi Takeda in a scissors death match, which took place in 2016, which took place at Freedom's promotion in Japan. Both men showed their talents, hitting each other with boards and light tubes. Takeda took a wooden board and covered with scissors the sharp parts on top, so it's literally sticking up like this, like like scissors, like the sharp parts. Takeda slammed Fukimoto on top of the board on the exposed blades, literally on the top of the scissors, covering him for the win. The wounds were so deep you could see them. You could see the gashes in there. Fukimoto fortunately lived, but he was rushed to the hospital. I think that was the one, and I think that's the only time they ever did that. Thank God, because if that pierced him in the lung, or the kidney, or the heart, that would have been horrible. God forbid. Number three, there I have Necro Butcher versus Madman Pondo in a 200 plus light bulb death match, which took place in 2002 in IWA Mid South. Necro Butcher and Madman Pondo were known to be hardcore, and his match showcased it to all its glory. The ring it was covered in light tubes, smashing light tubes into each other, just slamming and slamming and slamming. Mondo made a huge structure of light tubes and slammed Necro Butcher through it. Pondo won. Necro had a loose piece of his arm like his arm was loose, like a piece of his arm was loose, and they ended up calling for an ambulance. Luckily, he was okay. I think he still wrestles to this day, actually. But yeah, if you watch this match, I definitely recommend you to like not eat a lunch. Number two, I have meet Hyoshiro Matsunaga versus Kendo Nagasaki in a Piranha Death Match. You heard that right. Piranha Death Match. Took place on August 19, 1996 in the Big Japan Wrestling promotion. The match was insane. It had a live tank of piranhas, and the goal was to um, throw your opponent into the piranhas and inflict as much pain as possible. The piranhas could cause mass damage. The match started, and throughout the match, there was the usual deathmatch spots, but teasing the audience and going back and forth, things got interesting. Matsunaga's bloody head was placed into the tank, and you saw the blood causing a frenzy for the piranha. The audience was in horror. I was in horror. I was like, oh my gosh. Finally, Nagasaki threw Matsunaga in and placed a barbed wire board to keep him in there. Eventually, Matsunaga was taken out, not before the piranhas took a chunk out of him. Ugh, nasty. At your discretion, you could watch this match, but be careful. And now the moment we've all been waiting for, number one. The year was 1995, August 20th. It was Cactus Jack versus Terry Funk at the King of the Deathmatch tournament in IWA Japan. Both men were in the finals of the tournament. It was a no rope, barbed wire, explosive barbed wire board, time bomb, death match. Wow, that's a lot to say. So I would acronym it, but it's too long. So yeah, no rope, barbed wire, explosive barbed wire board, time bomb, death match. Both men were already had death matches prior to this and were already injured, battered and bruised. Uh, Funk was the first one to hit was get hit by first one to get hit by the C4 by landing a forearm on them, and then Cactus Jack getting hit by the C4 from the hip. The men both went back and forth hitting the barbed wire. The latter was brought in after the explosion did not go off, but was saved by the final explosion going off, actually causing the most injury to both wrestlers. I would recommend looking up this match and checking it out for yourself. Um, I think it's number one. Obviously, you have two hardcore legends like Mick Foley and Terry Funk. Yeah, I know we've seen recently a barbed wire exploding match that didn't go right, but hey, they've made it work. It failed for them, but then they actually went ahead and made another explosion, but it was actually injured. Hardcore wrestling is truly a sight to be seen and not for the faint of heart. Hardcore wrestling was big in the 90s, but surely making a comeback with promotions going back to the roots of hardcore, such as GCW and others, Game Changer Wrestling. I would recommend watching these matches if you have the stomach for it. This is the top 10 hardcore matches of all time. This is Ever from New Entry Wrestling Podcast. Make sure to check out our merch store at teespring.com and Pro Wrestling Tees. Check us out on TikTok and Instagram at New Entry Wrestling Pod, Twitter at New Entry Wrestling WP. Check us out on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Radio Public, and YouTube. Make sure to check us on YouTube. This is Ever, New Entry Wrestling Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us in this top 10. Until next time, bye guys. Woo!